And a welcome back to Iceland's own. In a battle of island nations, we have Gunnar Nelson. He's going to be representing Iceland, taking on Japan's Takashi Sato. And when we look at this fight, it is a lot of fun. There's a lot of different layers, a lot of different ways that you can break this one down. But I got to start with Gunnar Nelson. I mean, he has been away from the cage since 2019. He was originally supposed to take on Thiago Alves, and then he drew Gilbert Burns. It was Burns' second fight at 170. Ends up getting the win by decision, does Burns. So for Nelson, he sits out. Now, he's supposed to be taking on Claudio Silva coming up this weekend in a fight where I think he would have steamrolled my guy Claudio Silva, a guy of mine that I love to watch. He has a win over Leon Edwards. That's what always makes it fun when you watch Claudio Silva. But for Takashi Sato, coming in on short notice, representing Sanford MMA, and a very good quality of training partner for Sato. Obviously, you have Phil Hawes over there. You also have the Gilbert Burns connection, so he can draw from that in this fight. But a couple of guys that were there recently training, Luke Rockhold and Kevin Lee. How wild is that? It is an interesting one, though, because when you look at it for Gunnar Nelson, he had one fight left on his UFC fight contract coming into this one, so this would have been the last fight. He re-upped, so I want to give credit where credit's due. I read an article from MMA Viking, and they talked about the fact that, new contract, multi-fight agreement. We heard of an interest from other MMA organizations in negotiating with Gunnar, but Gunnar always had his eyes on the UFC. That was his father. His father's also his manager. Interesting there. But the thing about Gunnar Nelson that's the weirdest, and again, we can talk about the wins, we can talk about the losses. He's tied for number one overall of ever in the UFC's welterweight division with submission wins at 6. He's tied there with Demian Maia and Chris Lytle. Obviously, Maia spent time at middleweight as well, so you got to combine them for him. He is number one overall, period, in significant strike percentage at 56.8%. He's also a negative 1.6 striker in the UFC. Significant strikes for and against. So it's weird. When he picks his shots, he's incredibly accurate, but overall, slightly negative. For Nelson, Matt, I know you're a big fan, so it's kind of weird. You got to take
I'm not a big fan at all.
You love watching his fights. That's what I mean.
Yeah, but you're trying to say I gotta take that out of it. I think this fight's very neutral from my standpoint.
You love watching his fights, and you're a good person to talk about this with. His biggest statement win, I think of it as the Alex Oliveira fight, but what would you say?
It probably is the Alex Oliveira fight. You could go back a little bit further, but that's the wild thing about Gunnar Nelson. You always feel like, we fought 6 months ago, and then that turned into 12 months, which turned into 18, which is now going on 2 years, and it just would be nice to see him actually actively competing. The main event win over Rick Story, I know that was a split decision, but that was a really big opportunity for him, and that's the type of fighter Gunnar Nelson was at one point, though. That's the picture I'm trying to paint. He was like a main event, fight night star sort of fighter, where maybe Gunnar Nelson's not headlining pay-per-views or anything, but hey, we need somebody to co-main event or main event a fight night card. Give Gunnar Nelson a call. He has a decent following. But the weird thing about him, and I'm glad that you brought up his striking output and some of the numbers, because his style is very unique. He has a karate stance with very, very low output, like you said, and he doesn't really commit to a lot of his shots. Now, when he does sort of do that, like, build up, like Darren Till, where you get that, like, and then throw the strike. It's almost like a timing thing for him. But I worry about him when he fights the upper level strikers in this division. And Gunnar Nelson, to me, I've never really found the best way of describing this, but the highs of his game are very high. He is an ace on the mat. His striking is good in some moments. But then when you take a step back and look at the whole picture, there's a lot of holes in Gunnar Nelson's game. And I bring up Anthony Davis when I think about Gunnar Nelson, because Anthony Davis is a top 10 player in the NBA. He's a top 10 talent in the NBA, but he's never on the court. Sometimes he's unmotivated. Like, there's always something else. If you just look at Gunnar Nelson's MMA skills, he's one of the top 15 most skilled welterweights in the world. I just don't think he's a top 15 fighter in this division, because it takes a lot more than flashy jiu-jitsu and strange striking to really crack that top 15 nowadays. And for Gunnar Nelson, he still is the same fighter that he was in his first little run. And I go back to the Leon Edwards fight, and I know Leon is at the top of this division, and that was a split decision. No, it wasn't. Leon Edwards beat the crap out of Gunnar Nelson. But what Leon did in that fight was he made Gunnar pay on the in-betweens, and he also out-grappled him a lot. And that was the first time we've ever seen Gunnar Nelson get convincingly out-grappled by somebody who, like, Leon Edwards is a good grappler. He out-wrestled Vicente Luque when he fought him. But when you think about Leon Edwards, you don't think about wrestling and jiu-jitsu at the forefront of his game, and he looked pretty good on the mat with Gunnar Nelson.
Yeah, and when I look at Gunnar, do you think Charles Barkley would call him street clothes?
He might, yeah.
He very well could. For Takashi, you look at it, and I mean, it's been an interesting run so far in the UFC. He comes in, he takes on Ben Saunders, finishes him, loses to Bilal Muhammad by submission. Interesting, if you look at it for Takashi Sato, he is a good striker. He's got a really stiff jab. You saw that in his fight against Jason Witt. You see it where he's able to toss the jab out there, follow it up with the cross.
Nice.
Really good straight shots with a lot of pop at the end of them. He is an interesting grappler, and coming into the UFC, I expected, hey, this is a guy that takes it to the mat, gets the ground and pound off. He's going to be a great fighter that way. We haven't necessarily seen that wrinkle out of his game. I know he got a takedown against Bilal Muhammad. He had kind of like a hip throw up against the cage, and then Bilal got right back up out of it. But he's able to get that win over Jason Witt, and then he takes on Miguel Baeza, and he gets submitted. That fight was a year and 3 months ago. Obviously, Sato, he lost his father. He was supposed to take on Maki Pitolo. Pitolo out of the fight. Sato weighs in. There's tears. I was emotional. You hate to see it. But for Sato, very, very well-rounded. Much more output when it comes to his striking. So he very well. If Nelson's not able to get the takedown, I can see Takashi Sato easily getting a win that way. And again, I know he's only 2-2 in the UFC. It feels like it's been forever since we've seen him. And yeah, it will be interesting that way. And the other thing I want to say for Takashi Sato, he was originally supposed to take on Daniel Rodriguez back, way back, but he wasn't able to make it. And then he gets Baeza. Baeza's a really tough out. You hate to see it when you lose by submission to him. But in this fight,
he's not the toughest of outs.
In this fight, you look at the odds for this one. Nelson has been inactive for a few years now. Open to -300, -350. Takashi Sato open to +250, +270. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise us, they are to you.
Yeah.
271 total votes. This fight on short notice. 90% Nelson, 70% by submission for the 10% that have Sato, 75% by knockout. Matt, I hope Gunnar Nelson shows up ready to fight. Hopefully he's got all the swag and the gear on and not the street clothes. But I do have him in this one.
If Gunnar Nelson's at, I'll say 80% of what prime Gunnar Nelson was, I think he'll be able to win this fight. I do think there is a big skill gap between these two guys. If Gunnar is the fighter that he was sort of before these losses and the layoff and whatnot, and maybe he is past his prime. He very well could be, and they're going to fight this weekend, and we'll get an answer to that. But I do like Gunnar Nelson. On the feet, I think he's elusive enough to avoid some of those big shots by Sato. And I do think that once the fight hits the mat, Gunnar Nelson's the vastly superior grappler.
Big time fight coming up this weekend. I think Japan's Takashi Sato is a great shot coming in on short notice to get the dub, but both of us going with Iceland's Gunnar Nelson to get the win. He re-upped the fight contract. Hopefully he's back motivated and ready. Coming up this weekend, he was originally supposed to take on Claudio Silva, mind you. We have a big time card coming up. Paddy Pimblett's back taking on Kazula Vargas, Arnold Allen, Dan Hooker in the main event. Volkov taking on Tom Aspinall. You're not going to want to miss this. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.